If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the Manchester coach station was bathed in the orange light of the English sunset. Hurrying people crossed in all directions, dragging bags and dreams. Amidst the urban chaos, little Kian, just 3 years old, remained seated alone on a cold metal bench. His dark eyes, deep as wells, stared at the horizon, while his small hands tightly gripped a worn teddy bear, his only companion in that moment of abandonment that he still didn't understand. Kian's right foot was encased in an orthopedic brace, the result of a congenital malformation. The device, too heavy for his fragile legs, didn't stop him from anxiously swinging his feet as he repeated in a low voice, "Daddy will be right back. Daddy will be right back." A promise that echoed into the void. Hours earlier, Silas Stone had brought his son there in his battered old car, the car's interior a mess of overdue bills, bricklayers' tools, and a bottle of cheap whiskey forgotten on the floor. As a freelance bricklayer, Silas had been facing difficult times since Manchester's economy went into crisis. Scarce jobs meant unpaid bills, overdue rent, and an increasingly uncertain future. "We're going on a bus trip today, my son," Silas had said with a forced smile, his choked voice betraying his true intentions. "You've never been on a big coach, have you? One of those that travel far?" Kian had smiled innocently. Any moment with his father was precious, especially after so many days seeing him downcast, crying in corners, drinking more than usual. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "To a better place," Silas had replied, swallowing the lump in his throat. The truth was that, since Louisa's passing during Kian's birth, Silas lived consumed by guilt. In his moments of greatest despair, he would look at his son and see his wife's face, the same eye shape, the same smile, and along with that image came the lacerating pain of loss, the feeling that he had somehow failed her. Kian's physical condition only aggravated Silas's feeling of inadequacy. How could he properly care for a child with special needs when he could barely support himself? Doctors spoke of treatments, physiotherapies, possible surgeries in the future, things an unemployed bricklayer could never afford. That was how on that Sunday afternoon, Silas led his son to the furthest bench in the coach station. "Stay here quietly while Daddy buys the tickets, okay? Take care of Fuzzy for me." Silas adjusted the teddy bear in his son's arms, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. "Don't talk to strangers, I'll be right back." Kian nodded, confident. Daddy always kept his promises, or at least he used to before Louisa left. Silas walked slowly away, each step heavier than the last. He didn't look back once, fearing his resolve would crumble at the sight of his son's trusting eyes. In his tormented mind, he was doing the right thing. Kian deserved a complete family, people who could care for him properly, give him everything he needed, not a broken, unemployed father with no prospects. Time passed. An hour, 2. The movement in the station began to dwindle. Artificial lights replaced the sunset, and Kian remained seated, patient, hungry, and increasingly confused. His stomach growled, but he didn't move. Daddy had told him to wait there. At the opposite end of the station, Henry Morrison adjusted his tie, uncomfortable in the temporary driver's uniform. As the owner of Morrison Transports, one of the largest intercity coach companies in northwest England, he rarely had to take the wheel. But this was a special project. For a month, every executive in the company would work in a different role to better understand the business from the ground up. Henry was about to end his shift when he spotted the small, solitary figure. At first, he thought it was a child waiting for parents who had gone to the restroom or to buy snacks, but something in the boy's distant gaze bothered him. He approached cautiously. "Hello, young man, you all right?" Henry asked, crouching down to be at the boy's height. Kian looked up, meeting the stranger's kind face. For an instant he hesitated, remembering his father's advice not to talk to strangers, but there was something in that man's eyes that conveyed trust. "I'm waiting for my dad. He went to buy tickets," he replied in a low voice, pressing the bear tighter against his chest. "Have you been waiting long?" Henry inquired, noticing the brace on the boy's leg and his tired expression. Kian shrugged, uncertain. For a 3-year-old, time was an abstract concept. It could have been an eternity or just a few minutes. "Daddy said we're going on a trip," he explained, trying to sound excited. "He said it would be good for me." Henry felt a pang in his chest. The boy's expression, that calm, sad gaze, that unwavering hope, painfully reminded him of the son he had lost years ago. Raphael had been only 5 years old when a rare illness took him, leaving a void that no business success could fill. "What's your name, young man?" Henry asked, sitting beside him. "Kian Stone," the boy replied. "And this is Fuzzy," he added, showing the bear. "Nice to meet both of you. I'm Henry." He smiled, but the concern persisted. "Are you hungry, Kian?" The boy hesitated before answering. He didn't want to seem rude or ungrateful. "A little bit," he finally admitted, "but Daddy told me not to leave here. And you're an obedient boy, aren't you? That's very good." Henry took a packet of biscuits from his pocket that he had saved for a snack. "Your dad won't mind if you eat a little while you wait, will he?" Kian took the packet with trembling hands, sharing the first biscuit with the teddy bear before finally eating. The innocent gesture brought tears to Henry's eyes. "Kian, do you remember what time your dad left to buy the tickets?" The boy shook his head negatively, still focused on his impromptu snack. Henry looked around. The station was almost empty now. The last coaches of the night would depart soon, and a 3-year-old boy shouldn't be there alone for so long. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "I'm going to help you find your dad, Kian. Is that okay with you?" The boy nodded, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. He trusted this stranger in uniform, who had offered him biscuits and spoke with kindness. Henry picked the boy up, noticing how light he was, and headed towards the information desk. Each step echoed in the almost deserted station, while a dark premonition grew in his chest. That night would forever change the destiny of 2 wounded souls who, unknowingly, were about to find unexpected redemption in each other. "Good evening, I need help," Henry said to the information desk attendant, who was tidying papers, preparing to close for the night. "I found this boy alone. He says his father went to buy tickets, but it seems he's been here a long time." The attendant, Miss Josephine, looked at the boy with an expression that mixed concern and the weariness of someone who had seen similar situations before. "What's your daddy's name, my angel?" she asked, leaning over the counter. "Silas Stone," Kian replied, now sitting on the counter with his little legs dangling, the brace reflecting the fluorescent light. Ms. Josephine checked the system, reviewing all ticket sales for the day. "We don't have any tickets bought by anyone with that name today," she confirmed, exchanging a meaningful look with Henry. "Maybe he went to the bathroom," Kian suggested, his voice trembling slightly. "Or went to get us food." Henry felt his heart clench. It was evident the boy had been abandoned, but he didn't have the courage to say that to a child who still believed in his father's return. "Let's look for him throughout the station, okay?" Henry proposed, trying to maintain an optimistic tone. Ms. Josephine alerted station security, and soon 2 guards joined the search. They checked restrooms, snack bars, ticket counters, and boarding areas. No sign of Silas Stone. One of the guards, more experienced, suggested checking the car park. In the outer car park, they found several vehicles, but no one matching the description Kian had given. That's when the second guard noticed something, an old, battered car, parked in a more secluded area, with a child's cap hanging from the rearview mirror. "That's my dad's car," Kian exclaimed, recognizing the cap he had received for his last birthday. They approached the vehicle. It was unlocked and empty, with the key left in the glove compartment along with documents. On the back seat was a small backpack with some children's clothes, a drawing book, and prescription medicines in Kian Stone's name. "He left the boy's things," one of the guards murmured to Henry, keeping Kian distracted. "This is deliberate abandonment." Henry nodded gravely. The situation was clear now. While the guards contacted the police, he took Kian back inside the station, buying him a hot chocolate and a sandwich at the only snack bar still open. "Daddy's going to take a long time, isn't he?" Kian asked, after taking several sips of the chocolate. There was something in his voice that suggested that on some level he understood what was happening. "Sometimes adults get lost, Kian," Henry replied carefully. "But you're not alone, I promise. We'll figure this out together, okay?" The boy nodded, studying the face of the stranger who was now his only reference for security. There was sincerity in Henry's eyes, something that conveyed trust. When the police arrived, Henry had already decided he wouldn't leave the boy. Something inexplicable connected him to that small, abandoned creature. Perhaps it was destiny, or perhaps it was just the wounds of his own loss seeking some kind of healing. "I'm Henry Morrison, owner of Morrison Transports," he explained to the police officers. "I found the boy alone at the station. From what we could gather, his father deliberately abandoned him, even leaving his belongings in the car." Officer Deborah, specialized in cases involving minors, crouched down to talk to Kian. Her gentle and professional approach quickly won the boy's trust, and he began to provide more information about his life. "Where do you live, Kian?" Deborah asked. "In the yellow house near the corner shop," he replied innocently. "There's a big dog in front that barks a lot." It wasn't very specific, but it was a start. Kian also revealed that he had lived only with his father since birth, that he attended a nursery called Auntie Marlene's, and that his father used to work building houses. "And your mum?" the officer asked carefully. Kian's face saddened. "Daddy said she turned into a star when I was born. He cries when he talks about her." The answer made Henry's heart skip a beat. The resemblance to his own story was disconcerting. His wife, Amanda, had lost her battle with a rare complication during Raphael's birth. And when his son passed away 5 years later, it was like losing Amanda a second time. Now, before him was a boy who had never known his mother and had just lost his father, not to the natural separation of life, but to abandonment. "We need to refer him to Child Protection Services," Officer Deborah explained. "They will take him to a temporary shelter while we investigate more about the family and try to locate the father or other relatives." "I'd like to accompany him," Henry said impulsively, "at least until we're sure he'll be all right." The officer looked at him with a mixture of surprise and respect. It wasn't common to see people willing to get involved in cases like this, especially someone with the social status of Henry Morrison, whose name was known throughout Manchester. "You have no obligation, Mr. Morrison," she reminded him. "The state will care for the boy." "I know I have no obligation," Henry replied, looking at Kian, who was now playing distractedly with the teddy bear. "But I want to help. I have resources and can ensure he receives proper medical assistance for his condition." After a few calls and background checks, Henry was allowed to accompany Kian to Child Protection Services. On the way, the boy fell asleep. In the back seat of the police car, exhausted by the traumatic day, Henry covered him with his own jacket, observing the child's restless sleep. At Child Protection Services, the social worker Irene explained the procedure. Kian would be taken to the New Beginning shelter in the morning, where he would receive basic care while authorities tried to find relatives. If no relatives were located or deemed suitable, the boy would enter the adoption registry. "Is it possible to visit the shelter?" Henry asked. "Yes, but visits are limited," Irene explained. "Are you a relative of the child?" "No, I just care about what happens to him." The social worker looked at him with an expression that mixed skepticism and hope. "You can visit him, but please don't build up expectations in the child. It's already difficult enough for them to cope with abandonment." Henry agreed, although deep down he already felt that his involvement with Kian would not end there. The night wore on, and he remained at Child Protection Services, watching over the boy sleeping on an improvised sofa while bureaucratic procedures were carried out. "You can go home now," Irene suggested, around 2 in the morning. "We'll have new information tomorrow." "I prefer to stay," Henry replied, his determination surprising even himself. "I promised him he wouldn't be alone." When day finally broke, social worker Bernice arrived to take Kian to the shelter. The boy, still sleepy, instinctively clung to Henry's hand. "Are you coming too?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. Henry looked at Bernice, who nodded discreetly, allowing him to accompany them to the shelter. On the way, Kian stared out the car window as if searching for something or someone. "Is Daddy really lost?" he suddenly asked, his small voice breaking the silence. Henry felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, Kian, he's lost right now, but you're not, and that's the most important thing." The boy absorbed those words for a few moments, processing them in the way a 3-year-old can understand abandonment. "Will Fuzzy stay with me at the shelter?" was his next concern, clutching the bear to his chest. "Of course he will," Bernice assured him with a gentle smile. "Fuzzy is part of the family." Kian seemed to accept this explanation, returning to look out the window. Henry, observing the small profile, made a silent decision. He would do whatever it took to ensure that this child never felt abandoned again. Fate had placed Kian in his path for a reason, and he would not ignore that call from the universe. The New Beginning shelter was in a renovated old mansion in the Greenview district. Despite the faded paint and aged structure, there was evident care for the environment. Walls decorated with colorful drawings, toys organized on low shelves, and the smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread coming from the kitchen. It wasn't luxurious, but it was far from the cold, impersonal place Henry had imagined. Kian was greeted by Aunt Zelda, a gray-haired black woman with a welcoming smile, responsible for the younger children. Her maternal way won the boy's trust almost instantly. "We'll make a lovely bed for you and Fuzzy," she said, holding the boy's hand. "And then you'll meet the other children. We have a new friend for you to play with," she announced to a small group observing curiously from the communal room. Henry watched Kian being integrated into the shelter's routine with a mixture of relief and concern. On one hand, he was happy the boy was being well treated. On the other, he felt that leaving him there would be like abandoning him a second time. "You can visit him whenever you want during established hours," Bernice explained as they walked down the exit corridor. "But it's important not to create emotional dependence. Children in this situation tend to become attached quickly to adults who show interest." "I understand," Henry replied, although he already knew his involvement would be deeper than a simple occasional visit. "Does he have any known relatives? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" Bernice consulted the folder she carried. "We're still investigating. What we know so far is that the father, Silas Stone, worked as a freelance bricklayer. The mother, Luisa Nascimento, passed away during childbirth. There's no record of other close relatives in the documents we found in the car." "And what about his physical condition? The brace?" "Kian was born with a malformation in his right foot. According to the medical records among the documents, he receives treatment through the NHS. He has regular appointments with an orthopedist and physiotherapy sessions. We will continue to monitor this, of course." Henry nodded, making mental notes. As a successful businessman, he had contacts in the best hospitals in Manchester. He would ensure Kian received excellent treatment, even if he was just a visitor in his life. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked, already at the exit door. "Of course. Visits are between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., Bernice replied with a compassionate smile. "It's rare for us to see someone so committed to a child they've just met." "Some connections can't be explained," Henry said simply, saying goodbye. The next day, promptly at 2 p.m., Henry was back at the shelter. This time, he brought gifts. A backpack with new clothes for Kian, educational toys, and a drawing kit with thick-colored pencils, ideal for small hands. He found the boy in the inner courtyard, sitting alone in a corner, drawing intently in an old notebook. Unlike the other children who ran and played in groups, Kian seemed absorbed in his own world. "Hello, champ," Henry approached, crouching beside the boy. "What are you drawing there?" Kian looked up, a smile lighting his face as he recognized Henry. "You really came back," he exclaimed, as if not entirely believing the promise made. "Of course I came back. A promise is a promise," Henry replied, feeling strangely moved by the boy's reaction. "Can I see your drawing?" Kian turned the notebook, proudly displaying his work. At first glance, they seemed like just circles and lines made with colored pencils, typical scribbles of a 3-year-old. But looking more closely, Henry noticed something unusual. There was a pattern in the circles, a sequence that repeated with surprising precision. "They're numbers," Kian explained, pointing to the circles. "This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. He continued pointing to each circle, counting to 12 without hesitation. "Do you like numbers?" Henry asked, impressed by the clarity of the explanation. "Numbers are cool," the boy replied simply. "They have music." "Music?" Henry frowned, intrigued. "Yeah. When I count, I hear music in my head. Kian closed his eyes for a moment as if listening to something. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a song. It's pretty. Henry watched the boy, fascinated. Something extraordinary was happening there. Something that went beyond the normal development of a child of that age. How high can you count, Kian? The boy shrugged. Very high. 100. 1,000. I don't know. At that moment, Aunt Zelda approached, observing the interaction with interest. He's special with numbers, she commented. Since he arrived, he's shown abilities that surprise everyone. Yesterday, during snack time, he organized the biscuits into groups of 5 without anyone teaching him, and he can tell how many fingers we show without having to count them one by one. That's unusual for his age, isn't it? Henry asked, though he already suspected the answer. Very unusual, Zelda confirmed. I've worked with hundreds of children in my 30 years here, and I've never seen anything like it, especially considering the limited stimulation he probably had until now. Henry spent the next 3 hours with Kian, watching him draw, play, and interact with numbers. With each passing moment, it became more evident that the boy possessed a unique relationship with mathematics, a kind of natural intuition that defied comprehension. Over the next week, Henry didn't miss a single day of visiting. He always arrived with new educational toys, books, or games that stimulated Kian's numerical abilities. The connection between the two grew daily, and the shelter caregivers already referred to Henry as the boy's godfather. It was on Friday, during a particularly productive drawing session, that Kian surprised Henry once again. "Look, I drew you," the boy said, showing a figure that vaguely resembled a man. Beside the figure there was a sequence of colored circles. "Are those numbers again?" Henry asked, already familiar with Kian's particular code. "It's your phone number," the boy replied naturally. "You spoke with Bernice yesterday." Henry froze. Indeed, the day before he had dictated his phone number to Bernice, with Kian in the same room. But the boy had been distracted, playing with blocks, seemingly not paying attention to the conversation. And even if he had heard, how could he memorize an 8-digit sequence after hearing it only once? "For you remember my phone number?" Kian nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 899743216, he recited perfectly. Henry exchanged meaningful glances with Bernice, who was observing the interaction. This was more than a simple facility with numbers. It was an extraordinary talent that needed to be investigated and properly nurtured. At the end of that afternoon, before saying goodbye, Henry made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "Bernice, I want to discuss something important," he said, as Kian was led away by Zelda. "For dinner. I want to start the process to become Kian's temporary guardian, while the investigations into his family continue." The social worker studied him for a few moments before replying, "That's a big commitment, Mr. Henry. It's not like adopting a puppy. We're talking about a vulnerable child with special needs who has just suffered significant trauma." "I am fully aware of that," Henry replied firmly. "And I am in a position to offer everything he needs: emotional stability, quality medical treatment, specialized education to develop his talent with numbers. Furthermore," he paused, searching for the right words. "Furthermore, I understand what it's like to lose someone you love. I lost my son 5 years ago. Perhaps that's why I connected so quickly with Kian. I'm not trying to replace Raphael, but I believe I can help this boy." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Bernice, who had worked with countless adoption and temporary guardianship cases, recognized when someone had genuine motivations. "I'll initiate the procedures on Monday," she decided, "but I need to warn you that the judge may request the continued search for the biological father, even with temporary guardianship granted." "I understand and respect that," Henry affirmed. "But if the father deliberately abandoned Kian, even leaving his documents and medications, isn't it clear that he relinquished parental responsibility?" "Legally, it's more complicated," Bernice explained. "Abandonment needs to be proven and formalized. The court usually prioritizes the biological family whenever possible. However, considering the circumstances and your evident commitment to the boy's well-being, I believe we have a good chance of at least obtaining temporary guardianship." As he said goodbye to Kian that day, Henry felt a different emotion. He was no longer just a visitor in the boy's life, but someone who was about to take on a much more significant role. And no matter how much he tried to keep his expectations in check, he couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to bring Kian home, show him new horizons, help him develop his special talent. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, as he always did. "And Sunday too?" Kian asked, clutching the teddy bear. "Sunday too," Henry confirmed, smiling. "Every day, until you get tired of me." "I won't get tired," the boy replied, with a certainty that only children can express. "The numbers tell me you'll stay." Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, seemed to seal an invisible pact between them. In some mysterious way, through his singing numbers, Kian seemed to understand what was happening and what was yet to come. As the procedures for Kian's temporary guardianship progressed, Henry decided he needed answers, not just to satisfy legal requirements, but also to understand the full story of the boy who, in so little time, had transformed his life. For this, he hired Mark Albright, a private investigator he trusted, who had already done work for his company. "I want everything about Silas Stone," Henry instructed, in his office at Morrison Transport's headquarters. "Where he grew up, where he worked, where he might be now, and especially I want to understand why he abandoned his son." Mark, a middle-aged former police officer with a special talent for finding people who didn't want to be found, accepted the case with his usual professionalism. "I have some initial leads," he explained. "The police found rent receipts in the abandoned car with an address in Salford. Additionally, there were receipts for construction material purchases at a store in central Manchester. I'll start there." "Be discreet," Henry recommended. "I don't want to scare him, just talk, understand." "Always am," Mark assured him. "And if I may ask, sir, why do you care so much? You're about to get guardianship of the boy. The father clearly didn't want him." Henry was silent for a few moments, reflecting on the question he himself had asked many times. Because Kian deserves to know his full story someday, and because... He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because perhaps I need to hear from Silas himself that he truly doesn't want his son. To be sure that I'm not taking the child from someone who might regret it." Mark nodded, understanding. 3 days later, he returned with preliminary information. Silas Stone, 38, born in rural Lancashire, migrated to Manchester as a teenager. A construction worker ever since, he was known for his competence as a bricklayer, but also for growing problems with alcohol in recent years. "He lost his last steady job about 3 months ago," Mark reported. "After that, he only did sporadic odd jobs. His last known address is a boarding house in Salford, but according to the owner, he hasn't been there for 2 weeks, since the day of the abandonment." "And what about Kian's mother, Louisa Nascimento?" "Confirmed that she passed away during childbirth due to hemorrhagic complications. She was an only child, her parents already deceased. From what I could gather, Silas and she were not formally married, but lived together for 2 years before the pregnancy. All reports indicate they were a happy couple and that the pregnancy was planned and desired." This information intrigued Henry. How could a man who had planned and desired a child simply abandon him 3 years later? "Keep looking," he asked. "We need to find him." The search continued for another 2 weeks, during which Henry intensified his visits to Kian at the shelter. The boy's mathematical talent proved more impressive each day. He not only memorized complex numerical sequences with astonishing ease, but also demonstrated an intuitive understanding of patterns and sequences that defied his age. On a particularly productive afternoon, Henry brought a tablet with special educational apps for children. Kian, who had never used such a device before, quickly understood how it worked and progressed through the initial levels of math games with surprising ease. "He has a genuine gift," commented the shelter's psychologist, Dr. Paula, who was observing the interaction. "But more than that, he has a natural passion for numbers. It's not something he does to please or impress. It's something that truly fascinates him." "Do you think he could be a savant?" Henry asked, having researched the subject extensively in recent weeks. "It's possible," the psychologist replied cautiously, "but it would be premature to label him. What I can say for sure is that he has an extraordinary ability that should be properly nurtured, and he also needs a lot of affection and stability, especially now. It was the next morning that Mark finally brought the news Henry had been waiting for. Silas Stone had been located. He's in a municipal homeless shelter in the city center, the investigator informed him. He's lost almost everything, including his documents. He's in quite a precarious condition. I want to see him, Henry decided immediately. Are you sure? He's very debilitated, drinking constantly since the abandonment, from what I could gather. Precisely. I need to understand what happened to this man. That same afternoon, Henry drove to the shelter indicated by Mark. The contrast with his usual life could not have been starker. From his air-conditioned office on the 20th floor of a corporate building to the raw reality of the city center streets, where dozens of vulnerable people sought temporary shelter. In the shelter's internal courtyard, sitting on a concrete bench under a scraggly tree, was Silas Stone. Even without ever having seen him before, Henry recognized him immediately. There was something in the man's eyes, the same shape, the same thoughtful expression that Kian had when focused on his numbers. "Mr. Stone?" Henry approached cautiously. The man looked up, suspicious. He was thinner than in the photos Mark had managed to get, unshaven, his clothes worn. But what was most striking was his expression, a mixture of absolute defeat and a pain so profound it seemed physical. "Who are you?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "My name is Henry Morrison. I found your son, Kian, at the Manchester coach station." The name of his son provoked a visible reaction in Silas, a shudder as if he had received a blow. For a moment Henry thought he would deny it, invent some story, but instead the man just lowered his head. "Is he all right?" he asked in a low voice, still not looking at Henry. "Yes, he is. He's in a good shelter, safe, well-fed, receiving the medical care he needs for his leg." Silas nodded slowly, seeming simultaneously relieved and devastated. "May I sit down?" Henry asked, indicating the space next to him on the bench. Another silent nod. For a few minutes the two men remained side by side without speaking, observing the movement in the shelter. When Silas finally broke the silence, his voice sounded tired, as if each word required immense effort. "I'm not a monster," he murmured. "I know what people must be thinking. What kind of father abandons a child like that? A monster, that's all he can be." "I'm not here to judge you," Henry replied sincerely. "I'm here to understand." Silas laughed without humor. "Understand? Even I don't really understand. How can I explain?" He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "When Louisa got pregnant, it was the happiest day of my life. Can you imagine? A child of mine. A real family, finally. We bought the crib before we even knew if it was a boy or a girl. I painted the room blue when we found out." His voice faltered. Henry waited, patient. "Then on the day he was born, Louisa—" Silas swallowed hard. "The doctors said it was a rare complication, that it couldn't be predicted, that they did everything they could. But I was there. I saw the fear in her eyes. I saw when she passed." The words echoed painfully in Henry's own experience. He too had been by his wife's side when she passed, leaving him with a baby and an impossible void to fill. "At first I managed," Silas continued. "For her, you know, I thought Louisa would want me to take care of our son. And I tried. I swear I tried. I worked double shifts, paid a babysitter while I was at work, gave him his medicine on time, took him to appointments." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But then came the crisis. Jobs dwindled. Money ran out. And every time I looked at Kian, I saw Louisa. The same eyes, the same way of smiling. It was like losing her every day again. The drinking. It helped not to feel so much. But then came the guilt, because I knew I wasn't being the father he deserved." Henry listened, in silence, recognizing in every word of Silas the same despair he himself had felt after losing his son. The difference was that he had resources, financial and emotional, to deal with his pain. Silas did not. When we discovered the problem with his leg, That was the final blow, the man continued. The doctor spoke of physiotherapy, possible surgery in the future, expensive treatments. How was I going to manage that? No work, no money, no... He hesitated. No strength to continue. And then I thought, there are so many people out there who can give him a better life, a life I'll never be able to give. So you took him to the station, Henry concluded without accusation in his voice. I knew someone would find him soon. It's a busy place. I left all his documents, his medicine, his little clothes. Silas finally looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep. After that, I just wanted to disappear too. I drank until all my money was gone. I lost my documents, the rest of my things. I ended up here. Silence fell between them again, heavier now. Henry processed everything he had heard, trying to reconcile the initial anger he had felt about the abandonment with the complex and painful story he had just heard. I am applying for temporary guardianship of Kian, he said finally. I am in a position to give him everything he needs, medical treatment, education, stability. But I want you to know that I am not trying to steal him from you. If you want to get your life back, seek treatment, become a father again. Silas shook his head slowly. He deserves better than I can give, always has. He hesitated as if gathering courage for the next question. Does he ask about me? The question hit Henry like a punch. It was the same question he himself would ask if he were in Silas's shoes. Yes, he answered honestly. He says you went to buy tickets and that you'll be back. A solitary tear rolled down the man's battered face. He was always a boy of faith, he murmured, since he was little, believing in things even I couldn't believe anymore. He has a special talent, Henry commented, feeling it was important for Silas to know this. With numbers, specialists think he might be some kind of mathematical genius. A faint smile appeared on Silas's face. Louisa was good with numbers too. She'd do sums in her head quick as anything. Always said our son would get her intelligence. The conversation extended for another hour. In the end, Henry left his card with Silas along with an offer. He would help refer him to a recovery program if he wanted. The decision about the future, however, remained open. Silas first needed to decide if he was prepared to be a father again or if, in fact, the best option for Kian would be a new family. As he said goodbye, Henry asked one last thing. If I could say something to Kian from you, what would it be? Silas thought for a few moments, his gaze lost on the horizon. Tell him his dad wasn't a bad man, just a man who got lost along the way, and that maybe one day he'll find his way back. Henry nodded, keeping those words in his heart. On the way back, driving through the streets of Manchester, he felt strangely at peace. There were no simple answers in that situation. No clear villain, just broken people, trying to move forward the best way they could. And at that moment, more than ever, Henry was sure that his encounter with Kian was not accidental. In some way, both had been placed in each other's path to heal wounds that seemed impossible to scar over. The Judge Rodolfo Aureliano courthouse was particularly busy that Monday morning. Henry arrived early, impeccably dressed in his navy blue suit, accompanied by his lawyer, Dr. Isabella Chambers, a specialist in family law. In recent days, she had worked tirelessly to prepare all the necessary documents for Kian's temporary guardianship request. We have a solid case, Isabella explained as they crossed the main lobby. You have an excellent reputation, unquestionable financial stability, and have already established a significant connection with the boy. Furthermore, social worker Bernice's report was extremely favorable. And what about the biological father? Henry asked, his concern evident in his voice. He was notified of the hearing through the shelter's social services, but we have no confirmation that he will attend. If he doesn't come, the judge will likely grant temporary guardianship without further obstacles. Henry nodded, but his heart was divided. On one hand, he ardently wished the hearing would proceed without complications, securing Kian's guardianship. On the other hand, after his conversation with Silas, he couldn't stop thinking about the man's dilemma and how he would feel in his place. As they waited in the anteroom, Henry observed the other families present, anxious couples holding folders with documents, children nervously swinging their legs, social workers checking their reports. all united there by the same purpose, reconfiguring family ties, whether by choice or necessity. "Mr. Morrison," called the judge's secretary, "Judge Richard is ready to receive you now." The courtroom was smaller than Henry had imagined, with an atmosphere that sought to be less intimidating than conventional courts. Judge Richard Palmer, a middle-aged man with perceptive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, greeted them with a brief nod. "Good morning, everyone. We are here to discuss the case of the minor Kian Stone, currently under temporary state guardianship." He shuffled through some documents. "We have a request for temporary guardianship from Mr. Henry Morrison, a businessman with no criminal record, positively evaluated by the psychosocial team." He looked up. The biological father, Mr. Silas Stone, was notified of this hearing. The public prosecutor's representative present in the room confirmed the information. "Yes, Your Honor. He was notified through the social services of the municipal homeless shelter where he is staying. And it seems he will not appear." The judge was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Everyone turned to see Silas Stone hesitantly entering the room. He was clearly uncomfortable, wearing simple but clean clothes, probably the best he could find for the occasion. His eyes quickly scanned those present, lingering for a moment on Henry before lowering to the floor. "Mr. Stone, I presume," said the judge. "Please join us." Silas sat in the indicated chair, his hands restless in his lap. The judge proceeded, explaining the purpose of the hearing and the rights of each party involved. When he finished the formal introduction, he turned first to Henry. "Mr. Morrison, I would like you to explain your motivations for requesting guardianship of the minor Kian." Henry took a deep breath before beginning. "Your Honor, I found Kian abandoned at the Manchester coach station, where I was temporarily working as a driver. From that first contact, we established a special connection. I have visited him daily at the shelter and witnessed not only his needs, which are many, considering his physical condition and his exceptional mathematical talent, but also his extraordinary potential." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I lost my son, Raphael, 5 years ago. It was the most painful experience of my life. When I found Kian, I wasn't looking to replace my son. Nothing could do that. But I recognized in him a special child who needs care that I am in a position to offer: quality orthopedic treatment, specialized education to develop his mathematical talent, and above all, a stable and loving home." The judge nodded, making notes, before turning to Silas. "Mr. Stone, you abandoned your son at the coach station approximately 1 month ago. Can you explain your actions?" Silas swallowed hard, visibly nervous. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I have no excuses, Doctor. I did a terrible thing." He looked briefly at Henry before continuing. "After I lost my wife when Kian was born, I tried to be a good father. But things got difficult. I lost my job. I couldn't pay rent anymore, let alone the medicines and treatments my son needs." His voice faltered slightly. I thought he would have a better chance without me. That someone with better means could take care of him. It wasn't out of malice, it was out of desperation. I know that doesn't justify it. I know I failed him." The judge observed him intently. "Mr. Stone, are you aware that abandoning a child is a crime? That you could face legal consequences for your actions?" "Yes, sir," Silas replied, head bowed. "I am ready to accept any punishment. I just want the best for my son." "And what would be the best, in your opinion?" The question hung in the air. For a few tense seconds, all eyes turned to Silas, who seemed to be fighting an internal battle. He began, uncertain. "I want to say that I love my son. Always have. But I know that now I am not in a position to care for him as he deserves." He looked up, facing Henry directly for the first time. "I met Mr. Morrison. He sought me out. We talked. I saw that he truly cares about Kian. He has the means to give everything I cannot, and more importantly, he has a good heart." Silas took a deep breath before concluding, "If you ask me what's best for my son now, I would say it's to be with someone like him." A respectful silence followed his words. The judge observed the two men for a moment before continuing. "Mr. Stone, Are you formally relinquishing guardianship of your son? Do you understand that this is a serious act with permanent legal consequences? I am relinquishing guardianship, yes, Silas confirmed, his voice firmer now, as if the decision, however painful, brought some peace. But if possible, I would like to be able to see him occasionally, when I am better, if it is allowed. The judge exchanged glances with the public prosecutor's representative before turning to Henry. Mr. Morrison, how would you feel about supervised visits from the biological father in the future if conditions are appropriate? Henry didn't hesitate. I have no objections, Your Honor. I believe Kian has the right to know his origins, his history. If Mr. Stone seeks treatment and stability, I see no reason to prevent that contact, as long as it is beneficial for Kian's well-being. After a few more routine questions and the analysis of the reports presented, the judge was ready for his decision. Considering all the facts presented, the favorable reports from the psychosocial team, the voluntary relinquishment by the biological father, and Mr. Morrison's evident commitment to the minor's well-being, I grant provisional guardianship of Kian Stone to Mr. Henry Morrison for an initial period of 6 months, after which the situation will be re-evaluated with a view to possible definitive adoption. The judge then addressed Silas. Mr. Stone, I strongly recommend that you seek treatment for your alcohol problems and psychological assistance. I am not imposing criminal penalties at this time, considering your honesty and recognition of your actions, but this may be reconsidered if there is any inappropriate interference in the minor's new family configuration. Finally, he turned to Henry. Mr. Morrison, as of today, you assume legal responsibility for Kian Stone. We trust that you will fulfill this role with the same dedication you have shown so far. Details about possible future visits from the biological father will be defined later as the case evolves. With a bang of the gavel, the hearing was concluded. In the corridor, as they signed the final documents, Henry and Silas met again face to face. Thank you, Silas said simply, for taking care of him, for not judging me. Henry extended his hand, which Silas shook after a moment of hesitation. I'll do the best I can for him. I know you will. Silas hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but ended up just nodding and turning to leave. Silas, Henry called. The man stopped, looking over his shoulder. My offer still stands. If you want help getting into a rehabilitation program, I can arrange it. A glimmer of hope appeared in Silas's tired eyes. Maybe I'll accept. Not for me, but for him. So that one day he can be proud of the father he had, even if from afar. That afternoon, when Henry arrived at the shelter to pick up Kian, he found the boy sitting on his bed, meticulously organizing his few belongings. The teddy bear was already inside the new backpack he had received, along with his carefully stacked drawings. Hi, champ, Henry called from the doorway. All ready to go? Kian looked up, a smile lighting his features. Uncle Henry, Bernice said I'm going to live with you now. Is it really true? It is true, Henry confirmed, sitting beside him on the bed. My house is your house too now. What do you think about that? The boy seemed to think for a moment, his small face taking on a serious expression that made him look older than his 3 years. Can I take my number drawings? And Fuzzy? Of course you can. Everything that's important to you. And my dad? Kian asked suddenly. Does he know where to find me at your house? The question caught Henry off guard, despite knowing he would eventually have to address the topic. He opted for honesty, adapted to a 3-year-old's understanding. Your dad knows you're going to live with me, Kian. He wants you to be happy and have everything you need. And when the time is right, if you want, you can see him again. Kian absorbed the information slowly, his expression becoming thoughtful. Is he still lost? In a way, yes, Henry replied softly. But he's trying to find his way back. That might take time. To his surprise, Kian nodded with an understanding that seemed far beyond his age. The numbers tell me he'll find it. He just needs to count right. With those enigmatic words, the boy picked up his backpack and extended his free hand to Henry, ready to head to his new home. On the way, he drew invisible patterns in the air with his fingers, whispering numbers as if they were a secret song only he could hear. Henry's mansion in the Alderley Edge district, with its spacious gardens and crystal-clear pool, had long been a place dominated by silence. Built with the dream of housing a large, happy family, it had become a monument to loneliness after the losses Henry had suffered. The vast rooms, decorated with austere elegance, rarely received visitors beyond the housekeeper, Ms. Carmen, and the gardener, Mr. Anthony. Now, however, these spaces gained new life with the sound of Kian's uneven footsteps, the soft creak of his brace against the marble floor, and the constant murmur of numbers the boy recited as he explored his new world. "Your room is here," Henry explained, opening the door to a spacious room that, until a few days ago, was a rarely used office. In record time, he had transformed the space, walls painted in light blue, a new bed with a star-patterned quilt, shelves filled with children's books and educational games, and a table specially adapted for Kian's height, with drawing materials organized in colorful pots. "Is it all mine?" the boy asked, his eyes wide at the abundance of new things. "All yours," Henry confirmed, "and we can buy more things you like." Kian walked slowly around the room, touching each object with reverence, as if fearing that everything might disappear at any moment. When he reached the wide window overlooking the garden, he stopped, contemplating the evening sky. "Are there many stars at night?" he asked. "Thousands of them," Henry replied, joining him at the window. "Why?" "I like to count stars," Kian explained simply. "Daddy said Mummy turned into a star, so I count to see if I can find her." Henry felt a lump in his throat. The innocence of the explanation contained a depth of feeling that moved him. "We can count them together if you want. Every night." Kian nodded, satisfied with the proposal. Then, without warning, he asked, "Did you also lose someone who turned into a star?" The question, so direct and unexpected, left Henry momentarily speechless. How to explain loss and grief to a 3-year-old? But then he realized that Kian, despite his young age, already knew these concepts well. "Yes," he finally replied, "my son, Raphael, and my wife, Amanda, they became stars." "Is that why you were alone?" "It was, yes." Kian seemed to ponder this for a moment. "Now you're not anymore," he concluded, with the simple logic of children. "And neither am I." In that first month, they established a routine that met both their needs. Henry reorganized his work schedule to be able to take Kian to orthopedist appointments and physiotherapy sessions. He hired a specialized educator, Professor Eliza, who came 3 times a week for educational activities adapted to the boy's special talent. In a short time, it became evident to all specialists that Kian possessed extraordinary mathematical ability. He not only memorized complex numerical sequences after seeing them once, but also demonstrated an intuitive understanding of mathematical concepts that much older children still struggle to grasp. "It's as if he can see patterns where we just see random numbers," explained Dr. Clarice, a neuropsychologist Henry had hired to evaluate Kian. "He exhibits characteristics of a mathematical savant, combined with a quite developed general intelligence. It's extremely rare, especially considering the lack of formal educational stimuli in his early years." "What does this mean for his future?" Henry asked, concerned about making the right choices. "It means he needs an environment that nurtures his talent without isolating him socially," the specialist replied. "Regular school, yes, but with additional support to challenge his mathematical abilities. And very importantly, let him be a child. Play, explore, develop social and emotional skills. The mathematical gift is only one part of who he is." Following these guidelines, Henry enrolled Kian in an inclusive school of excellent reputation, which offered support for his physical condition and flexibility to accommodate his special talent. In the afternoons at home, he dedicated time to simply play, building block castles, telling stories, or exploring the garden in search of patterns in nature that so fascinated the boy. One night, while counting stars as had become tradition, Kian asked a question Henry had been expecting. "When will I see my dad again?" Henry carefully chose his words. "Your dad is trying to get better, Kian. Remember when we talked about how sometimes people get sick, not just in their bodies, but in their feelings?" The boy nodded, serious. "Is he trying not to be sad?" "That's right," He's in a special place where they help people who are very sad. When the doctors say he's better, you can see him again. What Henry didn't say was that in recent weeks, he had funded Silas's admission to a quality rehabilitation clinic. The biological father, after hitting rock bottom, had accepted help, recognizing that he needed to rebuild his life, if not to regain Kian's guardianship, at least to be able to look him in the eye without shame in the future. 3 months passed quickly. Kian flourished in his new environment, his initial shyness giving way to a vibrant curiosity about everything around him. The brace, which once seemed a heavy burden for his fragile little legs, was now just a detail in his active life. Doctors were optimistic about the results of the intensive treatment. With regular physiotherapy and possible corrective surgery in the future, there was a good chance of significant improvement in his mobility. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, while playing in the garden, Henry noticed that Kian seemed restless, his attention scattered from the leaf-sorting activity they were doing. "Is everything all right, champ? Are you tired?" Kian shook his head negatively but remained distracted. "Uncle Henry," he finally said, "can I call you Dad?" The question, so simple and direct, hit Henry with overwhelming force. For an instant he was speechless, a wave of contradictory emotions washing over him. "You can call me whatever you feel most comfortable with, Kian," he replied, his voice slightly choked. "But remember, you already have a dad." "I know," the boy said, thoughtfully, "but I think I can have two. One who made me be born, and one who takes care of me now. The numbers say it's possible." Henry smiled, moved by the boy's peculiar logic. "If the numbers say so, who am I to disagree?" That night, as he tucked him into bed, Kian called him Dad for the first time, with a naturalness that made Henry's heart overflow with emotion. It was a title he thought he would never hear directed at him again, a title that carried immense responsibilities and even greater joys. It was also that night that, after Kian fell asleep, Henry found a small box that had been left by social services among the boy's belongings. Inside, besides some documents, there was a crumpled envelope addressed simply to "Whoever finds my son." With slightly trembling hands, Henry opened the envelope. Inside, a paper with Silas's uneven handwriting. "If anyone finds him, tell him I wasn't the man he deserved. But maybe the man who can love him the right way will find him." Henry read and reread the message several times, feeling a mixture of emotions difficult to define. It was a letter of surrender, but also of hope, the hope of a father who, even in the act of abandonment, wished the best for his son. And perhaps in a way Silas could never have foreseen, his wish had come true. 2 weeks later, Henry received a call from the rehabilitation clinic. Silas had completed the first phase of treatment and was showing significant progress. The doctors considered a first supervised contact with Kian appropriate, if Henry agreed. "Is he prepared for this?" Henry asked, concerned about the emotional impact on the boy. "We believe so," replied the responsible doctor. "Mr. Stone has worked intensively in therapy, has been sober for almost 4 months, and has constantly expressed a desire to apologize to his son and thank you personally." After consulting Kian's psychologist, who supported the idea of a carefully planned meeting, Henry agreed. The meeting would take place in the clinic gardens on a sunny Sunday. When they arrived at the location, Kian seemed simultaneously anxious and curious. Henry had explained several times that they would be visiting his biological father, making sure the boy understood what to expect. "Remember, Kian, your dad has been unwell, but he's getting better. He might look a little different from what you remember." The boy nodded, squeezing Henry's hand tighter. "I know." The numbers said he would find his way. In the clinic garden, Silas waited on a bench, under a leafy mango tree. He was almost unrecognizable. His previously haggard face now had a healthy color, his once fragile body showed signs of physical recovery, and his eyes, which once reflected only despair, now shone with a newfound clarity. When he saw Kian approaching, his hands began to tremble visibly. For an instant it seemed he would stand up, but he restrained himself, respectfully waiting for his son to decide the distance he felt comfortable with. "Hi, son," he said softly when Kian stopped a few steps away, still holding Henry's hand firmly. Kian observed his biological father intensely, as if solving a complex equation in his mind. "You're not lost anymore," he finally stated. Silas swallowed hard, moved by his son's perception. "No, I'm not lost anymore. I found help to heal." "I knew," Kian said with the unwavering certainty of children. "The numbers told me." The conversation that followed was hesitant at first, with Silas clearly nervous and Kian observing him cautiously. But little by little, something of the old bond began to emerge, especially when Silas asked about the number drawings Kian still made. "You always liked numbers," Silas remembered, smiling shyly. "Since you were a baby, you were fascinated when I counted your little fingers." "Mr. Henry takes me to school now," Kian said animatedly. "There are special math classes, and the teacher said she's never seen anyone my age do such difficult sums." The pride on Silas's face was genuine. "Your mum would be so happy to see that. She was always good with numbers, too." When mentioning Louisa, Silas briefly looked at Henry as if asking permission to share those memories. Henry nodded encouragingly. He understood now that Kian needed to know his origins, his full story, the good and the painful, to grow fully. When the visit came to an end, Silas crouched down to Kian's height. "Thank you for coming to see me, son. It means a lot to me." "Are we coming back?" the boy asked, looking from Silas to Henry. "If you want to, and if Henry allows, yes, you can come back," Silas replied, careful not to pressure. On the way back home, Kian remained thoughtful in the back seat of the car. Finally, when they were near home, he broke the silence. "Dad?" "Yes, Kian?" Henry replied, still getting used to the title. "I think now I have two dads. One who is learning not to be lost and one who found me when I was. That's cool, isn't it?" Henry smiled, briefly looking in the rearview mirror and meeting Kian's intelligent eyes. "It's very cool, yes. Some families are like that, formed not only by blood but by heart." "Like an equation," the boy concluded, satisfied with his mathematical analogy. "Two different parts that come together and make sense." That night, as they counted stars from the bedroom window, Henry realized that both he and Kian had finally found what they were looking for. For the boy, it was the security of a home where his talent could flourish and where he was loved unconditionally. For Henry, it was the chance to love again, to fill the void left by losses that would never completely heal, but that now hurt less. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, the adoption was formalized. Surprisingly to everyone, it was Silas himself who made a point of being present, now living in a halfway house, working as a maintenance assistant and remaining sober. He signed the documents with steady hands and moist eyes, knowing he was doing the best for his son. "Thank you for not erasing my existence from his life," he said to Henry after the hearing. "I would never do that," Henry replied sincerely. "You will always be part of his story, of our story." A year after that fateful night at the coach station, the Manchester Herald published a small report, "Boy Abandoned at Station, Adopted by Businessman, and Reveals Rare Mathematical Talent." The article highlighted not only Kian's extraordinary talent, which was already attracting the attention of university researchers, but also the story of redemption behind the adoption. What the newspaper didn't mention, however, were the nights when Kian still woke up startled, asking if his father, now meaning Henry, was still there. Or the moments when, looking at the stars, he would ask which one was his mother. And most importantly, it didn't mention how Henry in each of those moments would hug his son tightly and answer, "I'm here. I always will be." Because the true transformation was not in Kian's impressive mathematical advancements, nor in Silas's successful rehabilitation, nor even in Henry's new identity as an adoptive father. The unique true transformation lay in the invisible bonds that now connected three fractured souls, each finding in the others the missing pieces to form a perfect equation. In a later visit to the clinic, where Silas still participated in regular therapies, Kian surprised both men with a question. "What is infinity plus infinity?" Silas and Henry looked at each other, not knowing how to answer this unusual mathematical question. "Well, son, infinity is already everything, so plus infinity," Henry began, uncertain. "It's still infinity," Silas completed, remembering his distant youth's math classes. Kian shook his head, disagreeing. "No. Infinity plus infinity is a family, because it never ends and there's always room for one more." The two men laughed, moved by the wisdom contained in the child's peculiar logic. That afternoon, as he watched Kian play between his two fathers, one biological and one adoptive, Henry understood that some equations go beyond traditional mathematics. Some equations can only be solved by the heart. And so it was that, under the starry sky of Manchester, between the distant city noise and the whisper of numbers that Kian always counted before sleeping, three destinies once separated by pain found their common ground, proving that sometimes the most improbable paths are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Kian, Henry, and Silas has deeply touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other stories that explore family ties transcending blood. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this narrative of abandonment, redemption, and second chances has awakened something in you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share your own experiences in the comments. Every day we bring stories that, like numbers for Kian, compose the music of life in all its complexity. Until the next story.